What is good, everyone? I am BA, back once again with the final piece of Wire bonus content. And I just wanted to sort of talk about the show as a whole, where I think it stands and what I think it did. Now, I was unable to experience this show at the time it originally aired, but I wish that I had, just to get a better understanding of what else was around it at the time and how it stood out in comparison to everything else that was going on TV while The Wire was being shown. I will say that it is one step away from being revolutionary, as I know that The Sopranos predates it, and The Sopranos itself had great, deeply written characters, cinematic quality, very well filmed and all of that. So it wasn't treading new ground in that regard, but The Wire definitely must have been standing above and beyond so many other shows which were being made at the time. Now, obviously, the show creator, David Simon, has a lot of history in novel writing. You could tell that throughout the show due to its long-form story arcs. Some things didn't even pay off that were planted in Season 1 until Season 5, such as the dirt they mentioned Daniel's having on him, only really coming to light at Season 5 when it was used at blackmail so he would not take the commissioner position. Things like that are laced all the way through The Wire, and that definitely is one of the reasons why it stands out to me. That long-form storytelling, typical of novels, when used in such a clever way in TV shows, works so well. Another example of a show that does that is actually Game of Thrones, thanks to George R.R. Martin having these huge-ass books, and again, telling many of the stories in Game of Thrones in long form. Not to say as well that shorter, more condensed stories can't be genius. One of my favourite TV shows, which I have reacted to 3 seasons of on this channel, is Tales from the Crypt, and all those stories are singular, told in 25 minutes, and incredibly clever. I mean, if you haven't seen Tales from the Crypt or one of my reactions, pick a random episode and watch it. You'll soon see why I like it. It's not just because they're horror shorts, it's because they all have clever twists. There's always like a rhyme to them. It's like poetry without rhyming words. A small condensed story with a punchline at the end. And me personally, I've always been drawn toward punchlines. Whether they're short and condensed like in the examples I just gave, or long form punchlines like in the examples of Game of Thrones and The Wire. And The Wire does this brilliantly, with so many characters and so many situations. It's also probably the best show ever made which focuses on, the ghetto side of life. There's a lot of shows which focus on crime, there's a lot of shows which focus on the police, but not many shows focus on the sort of ghetto side of crime. Another thing that makes The Wire so genius and stand out to me is its deconstruction of different segments of society. In the first season, we just sort of start in the ghettos, in the hood, talking about it from that perspective and the police's perspective dealing with that. But then straight away, it shows you what type of show it's going to be, when in Season 2, it's like, boom, we've done that, now this is what it's like at the docks, and here's a whole new set of characters to tell that story. I can understand why some people found Season 2 jarring. I personally think it's one of the best seasons. I don't find it boring. I'm surprised at people who do. And all the new characters are great. I understand, to people who liked it for the ghetto side, it's now a bunch of whiteys dropping the M-bomb on the docks talking about being longshoremen, and it's like an alien world to people that were just in it for the ghetto shit. But I appreciated learning about all aspects of society, and the docks were certainly more alien to me than the ghettos, and I still found it interesting. And it wasn't just about the docks, it was more about the destruction of industry and local businesses and industries just crumbling away as more things become international, such as product development, shipping, handling, all of that. And to watch these dock workers desperately try to hold on to jobs, desperately try to still make money, or just in general make the most of their lives while this is happening to the only environment they know, was really interesting to me. Season 3 is like a writer thought, I wonder if that Amsterdam-y system of putting the coffee shops and brothels in a segmented area does reduce crime in the other parts of the city, and what would happen if that went into practice. A genius premise for a series, and it was the perfect character in Bunny Colvin to spearhead that idea. And it just raises almost a more interesting question. Would that be better for cities if that were to happen? Would crime truly reduce in all the other areas if they segmented things like that? Obviously the bad side to it is, in many scenes in the third season, Amsterdam was painted as an absolute hellscape, which these places would be, but it would still be better if it reduced the crime. Like if 20% less people are taking heroin because of that, or 20% less people are being shot because of that, then as brutal as those areas may look, it is still statistically a better idea. And in the show, it took the stance of, this is a better idea, this is reducing crime across the board, but it's illegal so it's not gonna fly. And that to me is the poison chalice The Wire continuously gives you. It's a very pessimistically written show, and not to say that it isn't realistic. Sometimes realism and pessimism are one and the same, and it doesn't mean you're looking at the glass half empty just because you're looking at how the way things really are. David Simon does sometimes walk that fine line between pessimism and realism, but I think in this series he got it bang on with exactly how it would be if that happened, how people would sneer at the person responsible, how they would want to return it to the way things were, whether or not that was better for actual crime statistics. Oh, it was just a great season. A lot of people's favourite seasons, not mine, but I completely understand why it would be to a lot of people. And then by the time season 4 comes around, you're like, well, what are they going to do next? And then bang, the school system, a perfect setting to see how all this shit affects the youth, how these impressions are put on the next generation, and how these kids have to navigate and handle all these situations while becoming young adults. We followed 4 very different children. They all had very different experiences and were all affected very differently due to the experiences they had. Michael's storyline, I mean, what an incredible storyline Michael had, from the abusive household he was in, turning him very cold and callous, which you could see from the first episodes, and then eventually getting involved in Marlowe's gang, only to realise how full of shit they were too, and then by the end of the show becoming the next Omar. What an incredible character arc. Randy kind of being the soft, sweet-natured but also kind of snitchy one, soon learning that the world that he is from does not cater to that sort of mentality, and essentially getting it beaten out of him by the end of season 4, start of season 5. Namond being the all bark, no bite type character. He to me is almost like a more dickish version of D'Angelo. D'Angelo wasn't about that life, but he was never talking like he was. Namond, being the son of Weebay, had to put up that front. Look who his dad was. He had to act hard, only to realise that none of this shit was for him, and then eventually he got in with Bunny Colvin, which turned his life around, and by season 5 he's doing public speaking toward helping the AIDS crisis, etc. What a character arc. And the most tragic one was Duquan. Wow, what a sweet-natured little kid, just broken by the circumstances he was born into, and then eventually having to be looked after by heroin addicts, which in turn caused him to become a heroin addict. I mean, I can't think of a more tragic character arc than that. If you guys can think of one in The Wire, feel free to comment down below, but to me, that was probably the most tragic character arc of the entire series. And then season 5 comes around and we decide to focus on news, another industry which at the time was just crumbling in on itself as the internet slowly took over the traditional newspaper thing, and sensationalism took over reporting actual news. I loved the character of Gus, the one guy who was attempting to withhold the dignity of the news and still try and print real shit, being directly thwarted by Scott Templeton's sensationalism at every turn. And to me, Gus ended up almost being like the Bunny Colvin of the newspapers. He tried his best, but his best just didn't work in the world he was in. Tragic, and the way the news is nowadays, it seems like 95% of them are Scott Templetons. Jesus Christ. So this show really did predict the future with that storyline. I wasn't the biggest fan of the fake serial killer thing with McNulty, but I will say that a lot of the stories in this show are bred from people's frustration of things not working the way they should. And that was another example of that. And regardless at the end of the day of whether or not we think it was in the characters of McNulty and Lester to do that, you can't disagree with the fact that, wow, at that point they would be incredibly frustrated frustrated with the way the law works and the fact they can't just go after Marlo due to Tommy having to reroute the budget to different areas. So the big question is, where do I rank The Wire when it comes to my favourite shows? Well, all I know is I find it really hard to make a list, but it's definitely up there. Although I find it hard to make a list, I have to say to this day there's just something about The Sopranos which stands above and beyond all the others to me. But my mood changes daily, but it generally alternates between these 5 or 6 shows: The Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, Better Call Saul, and The Wire. So it's in my top 6, definitely. Some episodes it's number 1, some episodes it's number 6, but it is in my Rolodex of those 6 shows as one of the best shows of all time. So if that's what you've clicked on this video to learn, then just know I rate it so highly, it is now one of my favourite shows of all time. And the best thing I can say about it is, there's never been anything like it before, and there probably won't ever be anything like it again. Which to me is probably one of the highest compliments you can give to any piece of art. One side of me would love to see a prequel series to this set in the 80s. One side of me would love to see a prequel series of this set now. Imagine Avon coming out of jail, Marlo the businessman still alive, McNulty's still alive, Bunk's still alive, Kima's still alive, Daniel's still alive, Rosa's still alive, Tommy's fucking could be president by then. There's a lot of things you could technically do with the characters who still remain living, but I understand it said what it needed to say, and it's probably wishful thinking that I could ever imagine it would come back and be anywhere near as good as the original Wire show was. I will say this, having already watched Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul and Game of Thrones, I'm going to be hard pressed to find another show I like as much as The Wire while reacting to TV shows on this channel. And that brings us to a definitive close on my Wire content. It's been a really long journey. It's been months and months and months of my life. Great months. I met a bunch of cool people through reacting to this show on YouTube and my Patreon. You're all awesome. I really enjoyed this show, so I thought you guys deserved a little bit of extra bonus content before we finally say goodbye to The Wire and move on to True Detective next week. Hopefully you guys all stick with me for it, but if not, I bid you all farewell. If you've liked this video, click like, subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this, ring the bell to be notified as to when they drop. If there's anything you want to discuss, comment down below, and share this around to anybody you think might appreciate it or want to watch the entirety of my Wire content with us. My Patreon link is down in the description. If you become a patron, you get access to my blog, you get access to these reactions I put on YouTube a month and a half in advance, and you also get access to full-length versions of everything I react to on YouTube. So consider becoming a patron, it helps me and my channel out so much, and until next time, I have been BA, peace.